come to the Vintage Computer Festival at the Enter Museum to see the evolution of From the Hole to the Cloud.
Next talk from Professor Gabriele Balbi. We are happy to introduce Professor Galbi, coming from the Università della Svizzera Italiana.
Nice.
His main research area is media and communication history, with a focus on the history of telecommunications, the history of digital media, conceptual history of the media. In the academic committee, he is currently chair of the ICA Communication History Division, a member of the steering committee of the Mediahistory.ch Association, and member of the section committee of the Film, Media and Visual Studies section at the Academia Europa. Welcome, Professor Balbi.
Thank you so much for the invitation, first of all. It was very nice to be. It's my first time at the Enter Museum, first time at the Vintage Computer Festival, so thank you so much for the invitation. It's nice that we had the talk before and this talk that they speak beautifully together. So probably you save me a lot of time, and also to the audience, maybe they don't have to listen to me so long. What I'm going to present today is new results that we had from a research project I will talk about in a minute on the history of the web, because we were one of the first researchers to dig into the CERN archives. So the CERN archives were open because the 30 years rule is about to be expired. And so I will try to tell you at least 4 different and new stories about the web that we were able to discover. First thing, sometimes you will find, this kind of QR codes. Those are publications that we did in the meanwhile. So if you are curious about something and they say you can have a look. First thing, what is the history of the web? How we can do it? And at least in one of the papers that we wrote, we said that there are 3 different ways to couple web and history. There could be something called the history web, as you can see up there. So the web is used by historians as a day-to-day platform and something they work on. Welcome. So for example, historians like a lot digitized sources. They can access sources without traveling into the archives, for example. That's a way to use the web for an historians and historical perspective. Second point, we can also do history of websites, history of past websites. For example, you could also do it in the CERN archives. We found several printed websites. By the way, the CERN archive is all on paper, the World Wide Web collection at CERN. So it's very interesting how we study the web just on paper, including some websites of the past that were printed and are there. It's a way to save past websites, right? We didn't do it, basically, but if you want to do it, go into the CERN archives because it's full of printed websites. We did something, for point here, called more history of the web. So a kind of history of the web, but without considering websites. This is quite normal in media history. For example, there are several colleagues that they are studying newspapers from a political perspective, not studying the articles, or people studying photography without looking at directly at pictures, but they study photography per se, the technological dimension, the political dimension, economic of photography, or even broadcasting without having a look at TV programs. You could do broadcasting as a social phenomenon, as a public service, whatever you want from a political perspective. So we focus on politics, institutions, business, and also technologies. I know that technologies are maybe more interesting for you, so I prepared something more related to technologies today. How was the history of the web being told so far? My answer, simple answer, is it was told by the people that made it. So we had 2 main books that were published the same year, 1999, by Robert Caillot with James Gillis, one of the founding fathers of the web. And the second one, maybe most known, Tim Berners-Lee wrote this book, Waving the Web. Very recently, I think it was September, if I'm not wrong, Tim Berners-Lee published another book where he claimed that the web is totally wrong. So what he had in mind is not what at the end was realized because of big brothers, because of big companies that created walled gardens in the web. And so he claimed that we need to make a web for everything and everyone, for everyone again. So going back to his original idea. And in this book, as you can see from the subtitle, there is also an unfinished story of the World Wide Web. So he as makers, as founder, remade the history of the web. There are several media that they really like stories, they really like mythologies of genius inventors, and very often they tell the same story. So these inventors that had an inspiration, that create something great, and I would try to be skeptical about it, because those stories of genius inventors, call it Steve Jobs or call it other big moguls, are always the same. They created something, they didn't like to go to school, for example, they quit school and they change everything about their life. So be skeptical, according to me, about this narration, which is always the same, including Sam Altman, the genius of AI today. There is limited historical research, probably because of a lack of sources. And this is the project I was talking about. That's the three of us working on the project. This is Jens Wigens, one of the CERN archivists at that time. As you can see, it was COVID time. And we are staging in front of a plaque at CERN, one of the corridors of CERN. If you have ever been there, you know that you can lose yourself very easily. In one of these offices, apparently one of the offices of Tim Berners-Lee, there is this plaque where the web was born. There are 5 plaques over exactly like the same, and nobody knows exactly where the offices were. So again, it's a kind of reinvention of a tradition. Anyway, the Swiss National Science Foundation was so kind to finance us for 4 years and a half, and we dig into these archives. So as I said at the beginning, my findings, first thing, I would like to tell you something more about the archive per se, because when you go into an archive, it's important to understand the structure, who created it, etc. So something more about it. Second point, which were the competitors? We also discussed before about why a technology wins or loses. So let's see the panorama at that time and why the web at the end of the day won against the competitors. Third point, why the web is called the web. So we discovered several sources on how it was called and which were the alternatives, several alternatives over time, and why they decided to pick up World Wide Web. Final point, the confusion. The web was often confused with the internet, and this was for Robert Caillot and people at CERN something very bad, because they didn't recognize their work, and the internet, as we heard before, was invented much before than the web, and it was more connected to the US. So another confusion is this technology from US or from Europe? And we will see something more about it. The third confusion is about mosaic. So people believed that the web was mosaic per se, instead of a browser. We will go back on that later. The collection. The collection is not the result of an institutional decision. We have an archive made at CERN, but it was made just randomly, basically by Robert Caillot. We do have found also several documents from Tim Berners-Lee. He did not participate in the creation of this collection. There are several documents of Tim Berners-Lee in the United States, for example, at the MIT, and they are not preserved there. Other documents are preserved at the British Library. So it's a kind of, part of the story of the web is at CERN. And there are some excluded, what is interesting here is a repository for analysis of cases that are excluded or marginal within the official story, so made of other people that are not always known by them. We wrote a paper on this topic. The structure, those are the 2 PhDs that work with me. As you can see, they are surrounded by boxes of paper. As I told you before, it's all on paper. So it was even physically an effort for all of us. As you can see here, this is the collection and the structure. The majority of the folders were done by Robert Caillot, and especially they were used for the book that he published in 1999. There are also recordings of interviews on tape, of course, at that time. Then another part was Dan Noises, then Ben Siegel, and then James Gillis for the book itself. So James Gillis was the other guy writing the book with Robert Caillot. Let me give some examples of the sources that are preserved there. Press cuttings, for sure. Printed emails, so again, something that we do not print anymore, or at least they're not so printed. It's printed there because people tended, to preserve something. Promotional materials. I don't know if you've ever seen the logo of the web. There are several versions. This is the blue one, but the most famous one is in green, basically. They tried to create logos to promote the idea of the web, but at the end of the day, it didn't work so well. As you can see, the word CERN is underlined, but also the global hypertext. What is a web? It's a global hypertext. That was one of the main points for them. There are conference proceedings, so people going around, especially Robert Caillot, but also others, promoting the web everywhere, obsessively. From the 1992 to 1996, they travel a lot to promote it. And so you can have a look even of the tickets. Robert Caillot preserved everything, including the tickets of the restaurants or hotels where he traveled, so you can literally follow him over time. There are some sources, what we call the sources of inspiration. So every time there is a kind of invention, it's relevant to see how people that created a new technology were inspired. And for example, the whole Internet Users Catalog is there, and other sources, including websites, newspapers or magazines or whatever. So what people inventing the web read at that time, you could reconstruct a little bit there. Also coexisting projects, for example, Alexandria project, so the idea of a European web after the web was emigrated into the United States. For example, the project was called Alexandria, again a big name, like the Library of Alexandria, but it didn't work at the end. And I will show you something later. So I will show more sources, just to have a brief overview of what you can find there, including printed websites, as I mentioned at the beginning. Briefly, which were the competitors? The second point that I mentioned to you. This is a draw that was sent to us by Robert Caillot himself, and it's unpublished, and it's a way in which he explained the web. It's something that you have to read it historically, so from the past year to the future there. Future, we are talking about 1993, more or less, here in the middle. So according to Robert Caillot, the web made converge several other previous technologies, including, as you can see, hypertext, Gopher, of course, the PC that we heard before, of course, network and networking, and we heard before about networking. And then the web was a way to make all those stuff converge, and then the web created other new technologies. You can find it on your right. That's had to be read in historical perspective. Some of the ways through which Robert tried to explain his stuff are not immediately graspable. He was a computer scientist, so maybe translating something into normal language was not easy, but it's important to understand how he tried to do it. There were several competitors at that time. I tried to focus especially on information retrieval systems on the top, and then hypertext systems, full of hypertext systems at the time. The web was not the only one at all. There are some examples here: Hatch and Prospero, Alex, Waze, and especially Gopher. Gopher was considered the main information retrieval system at that time, with a hierarchical structure of menus, point to other menus. You could find documents, you could even find sound and images, and there was a keyword search. So it was a system quite similar to the World Wide Web, or how the World Wide Web was conceived. And if you have a look at this map, that it's one of the sources that we found there, it's quite interesting how you could see different uses of different alternative systems, for example, in the United States. They were used all together. But one quotation here of Robert, 2012, it's quite interesting, of the fact that as assigned, a special issue of electronic networking or access of information on the internet had only 6 articles. Of this, one was by us on the World Wide Web, and the 3 others on respectively Prospero, Archie, and Waze, no one of which are commercial and 2 of which are subsumed in the web. One of the idea of the web is to include all these alternative technologies and making more powerful. Why the web won at a certain point, 1993, 1994, 1995, is not easy to establish, but probably one of the main reasons is simple, it was free. For example, Go, you have to pay Gopher, which is a huge difference and one of the ways through which the technology was spread. Open access, we could use that word today. It was not used in 1993, but I mean, we could say something like that. In terms of hybrid systems, again, all the reference to the previous presentation, so I will go not so much in depth, but we have found an interesting source, which were the advertisements of alternative systems compared to the web. And so one of the PhDs made a paper trying to understand how these ads were used by the people there, why they decided to preserve advertisements. Because they want to advertise it as well. And so they tried to take inspiration from the previous advertisements and to make a consistent difference, which is the point of difference marketers would say of the web compared to the previous technologies. So again, one point here to be taken according to us is it could have been different. The web was one of the information retrieval system, one of the hypertext systems, and at the end it was able to win. Every time the history is told by winners, but there is also histories that should be told by losers. This is something that we believe is important as historians. How the web was called, sorry, it's not so big, but let's have a look at the beginning. March 1989 was mentioned before, the first proposal written by Tim Berners-Lee. And then there were several proposals between March 1989 and October 1990, actually 3 proposals that we found in the archives, with actually 3 different names. In the first proposal was called, it's ironic, X. So they didn't know what to call it, basically. It was not Elon Musk or anyone that, forced to call it that way. The second one was called Mesh. If you look at the center here, the second proposal is Mesh, a proposal Mesh. Then the third one, late 1990, it was called, it's on the top, World Wide Web, a single word, without space in between. Okay, going back there. So 3 proposals, 3 different names. In between, there were several informal brainstorming. And we found all the sources and we interviewed the people that participated in these brainstormings. By the way, one brainstorming was, they were very clear. Behind the tree in the cafeteria of CERN, it was very hot. They drank a pint of Carlsberg. So they even remembered the type of beer that they were having at that time. With different possibilities. Loki, it was the god of misinformation in Sweden. So they decided to get rid of it. I mean, disinformation and the system of information. Tim Berners-Lee proposed it. It was an acronym, of course, not his name, according to him. They decided to get rid of it. Moi, which is even more egotic in a way, and it was another acronym. And then they decided to go with the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web was the final name. They wanted to have as a final name. The answer is simply no. And now I want to show you some point here. The World Wide Web was considered since the beginning a temporary name. And in several documents that we found, it was pretty clear the fact that as soon as they find a new and a better name, they would replace it. So why don't we temporarily call it the World Wide Web? It just says what it is, with even drawings that we found. So the metaphors of spiders, it's often there. Those are all drawings that you can find in the CERN archives. We always knew worldwide usage was the ultimate goal. That's why we call it the worldwide back in 1990, according to Robert Caillot. But it was long, very difficult to translate, very difficult to pronounce. And it was very clear to the people that were there. Friends at CERN say it would never take off, especially with a non-syllable acronym. Sounds longer than a full name, so too long to be pronounced. I still have trouble imagining how the French would pronounce it. So here the French that they don't like to pronounce, for example, British or American names, how would you do it with a name which is not French, for example? In executive IT meetings, discussing resources was painful with such a long name. We call it Teams project. So it was too long to be pronounced in those meetings. Some people didn't care. The ECP department secretary told me her boss, Mika, referred to as qualcosa. That's an Italian thing because Pier Giorgio Innocenti was an Italian and was the chief of Tim Berners-Lee. It could be translated as that thing. So they referred to it as that thing. So it was easier probably to be referred at it. So I wanted to provide some examples of the fact that over the time, and now I go back to the timeline, over the time there were several doubts about how to call these new technologies. There were several variants that we found it all together with an hyphen, two hyphens, or without hyphens. It was, in all the documents that we found, it was alternatively used. So in order to say that it was not clear how to automate it. Several abbreviations. This is very famous, of course, but also W3 is famous, but also the web is famous. It's always the same technology, but called in very different ways. What is interesting here, that from 1994 onwards, there was this confusion, and I will go back on this confusion on the next point, so I'm not spoiling myself now. Another interesting part is the trademark application. It's not well known, also because we are the first one digging into the archives, and so we found it. CERN, in 1995, decided to trademark the World Wide Web, trademark the www. And so it was done in the United States, February 1996, but the federal office deputy to trademark rejected the application. And they said it's a common name. So we cannot trademark something that is public and now it's taken for granted. Everybody knows it. So they decided to trademark something too late at CERN, which is an interesting story. So they could not trademark, it was put for free in the public domain, and probably this is one of the reasons of a success.
Did they try to trademark World Wide Web or only web?
The different names altogether. And they were all considered a common word, common use. Yeah. Okay, just to let you know that something that we take for granted as a World Wide Web, or whatever, for people that invented, it was not clear at all that it could have been called that way, which is ironic. It's not the first time in media history where the inventors are not sure about the names of its inventions. Okay, now I go to the last point. I told you it was brief, briefer than 1 hour. The confusions. We found several sources about the confusions, as I mentioned at the beginning, especially 3 main confusions: web as the internet, first point; web as something created in the US, which was very bad for a European center like CERN; and third point, web as a mosaic browser. This is a drawing used by Robert Caillot when he went around to promote the web. And as you can see here, he tried to make a comparison: internet as a railway or the road, semaphores are the protocols that were explained today, including TCP/IP, and the track, which is the World Wide Web. So it's just one of the services in the road. To us, could be very simple to understand, but people didn't get it completely. And especially journalists made several mistakes, and they continuously created confusions between the web and the internet. And Robert Caillot did something very strong. We found his letters. He wrote to everyone making mistakes. Unbelievable, right? So, for example, first thing, he wrote to the Italian Public Service, RAI, claiming that you failed to mention that the World Wide Web was invented in Europe at CERN. So, writing directly to the journalists that made something wrong in TV broadcasting in this way. RAI did not attract the public attention to the origins of the World Wide Web. As you can see, at that time, Robert Caillot wrote word, line, web. So it was different that it's spelled later. The European participation in the future of the information society is strong and deserves fair mention. Second point, there was a famous World Wide Web cafe at the G7 in 1995. You can see here some images. This is Robert Caillot, for who doesn't know him. And during the G7, there was a kind of showcase of the World Wide Web. And Robert Caillot explained all those kind of stuff. And you can see here also one of the screenings at that time, taking a picture. But there was a mistake also there. We can read how Robert Caillot complained against it. We found regrettable that we were not allowed to make the European origins of the web known to the public attending the World Wide Web Cafe. There was American, I'm reading the red, American showcase in which Europe was notably left invisible. So again, you see a complaining against something. Also complain against the French magazine, Géopolitique. Le web était mis au service au CERN. Le web est une invention et un développement européen. So again, this European origins that was failed to be described. Last point, so last confusion. So first one, the web is the internet, so he created drawings in order to make it more clear. Second point, the web is a European invention, so let's replicate it to the journalist making mistakes. Third point, the web as mosaic. And even Robert Caillot again, this is one of the papers where we have all the quotations. Mosaic is fast becoming synonymous with the World Wide Web, although it's only a client. People are beginning to confuse mosaic and W3. So again, two different way of calling it in one single sentence. In addition, NCSA just soak up what we put in the public domain. They have put the access authorization code into their library after we release it. We do not have enough resources here to do the inverse. So again, Robert Caillot started to realize that people don't call it, I surf the web, but I go on mosaic, which is something different, and he complained about it. I go quickly to the conclusion, and then if you want, we can discuss a little bit more in general about this story. The conclusion is the fact that thanks to an archive, of course, you have new sources, new stories that can emerge. So in a way, every time an archive is open, from an historical perspective, I'm an historian, new stories are available to the public and to researchers. And one of our goals is to have these stories publicly available. A second point, which I think is super interesting when we study technologies, is the uncertainty. Very often new technologies bring with them uncertainties. In this case, we have seen names, for example, or confusions, or others that I haven't discussed so far because I wanted to keep it short, but I mean, there are several uncertainties the new technologies bring uncertainties because they are new, basically. And then people later decide what to do with the technology, because it's often the people and users deciding what the technology could be in the future. Third point, new technologies are required to be promoted, required to be advertised, required to be marketed. And a PhD student of mine decided to have a paper on it, combining the literature of marketing with the literature of history of technology and finding some connections between the two. Technologies need to have marketers behind it. Robert Caillot was a marketer, not of course, he was a physicist, a computer scientist as well. But I mean, he acted as someone promoting the web. As you have seen, I provide you some examples, and there are several other examples of this marketing activity of Robert Caillot. I mentioned it before, last point, it could have been different. Every time you approach a story, with new sources, every time you see something new emerging from what is taken for granted story, you realize that it could have been different. Other technologies could have been, could have replaced the web, or the web could have died at a certain point. Probably the migration to the United States at the MIT 1994 was key in order to preserve this technology and to launch this technology. So to me, I like to consider failures and, as we can see here, successes on the same level, and I think that historians should do it. That's all. Thank you so much for the attention.
Thank you, Professor Balbi. Please.
Thank you. Was there a browser already developed at CERN at the time, or why did Mosaic took over?
It was American, produced by a private company, and it was much better and much more user-friendly than any other browsers. The key point, it was already mentioned in the talk before, of browsers. Browsers are so important in the history of the web and the internet per se, because they allowed everyday users to access the network. And we found several letters and several reflections on people creating the web and saying, okay, we could have our own browsers. They tried to make it, but at the end of the day, they realized that the American one was much better and much more usable. So basically, they tried to do it at the beginning, but then they discovered that,
But
it was
at the
already
very
done.
beginning, I mean, they didn't
Yep.
develop it without a browser, right? In order to develop it, they needed a browser during the development process.
Yep.
What was the browser, and was it ever released? Or?
The web was completely different from what we are used to at the beginning. So we had lines, it was more textual. You did have hyperlinks, but you didn't have a door of access like we have. I could have shown you maybe the first page, which is online. If you go www.cern.ch, you could even retrace the first page, which is totally different. So you need to know the name of the web page that you wanted to access, for example, which is something for us not understandable, right? We want just to Google it and that's all. There is even a name right now. So it was totally different, the architecture in a way, or better. The architecture was similar, but the way you access the architecture was totally different. Knowing in advance web page and the name of web page is something today totally disappeared.
Well, like a phone number. They were thinking.
Like a phone number.
And there was a internet World Wide Web directories printed. Yeah.
You also had a directories like a phone book. Given to your example, if you have a look at the first proposal of Tim Berners-Lee in 1989, there are 3 or 4 metaphors that are continuously mentioned. Phone book, a library is the second one. So even the inventors, they had in mind the phone book as an example. So they wanted to have a phone book that was digital, let's say.
If we go back to the 80s time, one of the main issues of
You mean the timeline or?
the timeline,
Yeah.
CERN had an issue at the time.
Yeah,
That's what they were trying to solve before the 89.
yeah,
The CERN had an issue with all the scientists which were spread around Europe
yeah.
could not access information which was there. That's how it started, if you remember right.
Totally right.
And that's what I'm sorry, that's what I'm missing. What was the cause for that? Because CERN is not in the World Wide Web business.
Yep.
They came up with this idea, and then as to associate other, this is what the documentation shows.
Yep.
Well, and that's where they came from, basically wanting to how to access information. And they needed some way to have something which allowed everybody, all the scientists and so on, to share information, which included that. The reason why I say that is because there was a project going on pretty early, because they were looking for a way of networking all of these places together and how to do it. And because the scientists were spread out, there was no way to use any of the other things because you needed access. And I was involved from the communication side because they asked that question.
Okay.
It was with that team which was there.
Okay.
At that time, they were looking for a communication network at that time. But their reason was basically simple: how to access information, make information available, and exchange messages between the scientists. And that's what I'm missing in your thing. Yes, everything you said is fine. But
No, totally right.
Why? CERN is not in the business of making a web. That's something that people get it wrong.
Super important question, super important.
They're not in the business. They had a problem. And the problem was they had all these scientists spread around Europe, and they wanted to faster get the information faster in that way.
We are writing a paper on this topic, I didn't including it. If you look also, the title of the proposal is information management.
Yeah.
So the big issue, and one of the keywords quoted continuously by Tim Berners-Lee was information loss.
Yeah.
If you have a look at the paper, the loss of information, we are losing information, we cannot retrieve documents, and all the people cannot communicate anymore.
And also because they were not able to have the access to the right documents at any time. or they were missing the documents because they were there, but they were not able to easily access them because there was no. So the search engines came a bit later on, which is it, and none of the systems that you mentioned had a good enough search engine. That was one of his issues as well at the time.
Right. I should have mentioned because it's a piece that you
All those systems
need to keep it in mind.
which you have mentioned are specific to the usage of what they were defined for and not for the usage that they wanted, and which was required also a search engine, which came much later. Because still at the beginning, what they had is a screen, it was just a screen.
Okay.
You look at your
Yep.
first screen in the search, it's just a screen
Just a screen.
and had links. So the links, the number of links suddenly became too big.
Thank you.
Directory and so on. Obviously, if you remember 80s, we didn't have that much memory available to
Oh,
us
yes.
and to have all these links and so on.
Yeah.
That was another issue.
Sure.
And they were looking at networks to solve that, and networks could not solve that with ATM or SDH and so on. And the TCP/IP and so on, which you mentioned earlier, the TCP/IP is cumbersome, and the LAN networks which are there cannot handle all, well, it's the other way around. The networks which were there, SDH, ATM and so on, have a cumbersome non-talk protocol, which you cannot then. So TCP/IP is one level up, which is the transport.
Yeah.
If you look at the OSI model, it's, and all this is above is level 6 and so on, OSI model. And we forget in the internet the whole OSI model. The OSI model solves that issue of what is there.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Nice, very nice, interesting comments. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Yeah.
I think the confusion that you mentioned is continuing, because often if you read something in the media and they refer to content from social networks, they say in the internet we found this and that.
Also, Robert, can you agree with you? Because he said that now the confusion is there, like it used to be in 1993, and he said, I stopped fighting it because I lost. So he simply said, there is an interview with us, he said, I was wrong probably at the beginning, but I was trying to advocate our system. Of course it's different, but people don't care anymore. So. And maybe also with the app systems, it's even less clear, the difference, because you have a mega app where you stay there like, the social media company or whatever. And so it seems to be like a unique place, which is wrong.
Just one question. So you looked at all these documents. Did you perhaps find the email that we sent to John Postel in these documents? The problem is we don't have this email anymore. Yeah, it was sent in '87, and we don't have a digital copy of it.
87. I need to find, so let's exchange email, because we have a mega Excel with all the documents that were cataloged. So I don't remember the specific email. For example, we also had a look at the World Wide Web talk. I don't know if you know about it. It's all online. A PhD student of mine created a way to surf it, which is made of all the newsletters and the exchange of communications among the inventors. So you can access it now maybe more easily, and maybe you can find something related to it. So if you want, I can send you the link later. I don't remember exactly that mail, but maybe yes.
I think there's a question from behind. Okay. Question? No? Go ahead, please.
So this is actually the right slide. So X, Mesh, and the World Wide Web. So were X and Mesh just prototype builds, or were they actual different ideas or concepts?
X was, we don't know what to call it. Mesh, I forgot to mention, so thanks for your question. The idea was to have a mesh of networks and systems. But then at the end of the day, it was too similar to mess. That was what we found in the sources. So confusion, basically, and they decided to get rid of it. But the idea is to have this mesh, so entangled. That's the English, how could sound at that time. So entangling different networks and connections. It was the original idea.
So it could be called a precursor or...
Yeah, a precursor or a way to metaphorically express what you want to do. And then the metaphor of web with the spider, etc., became the relevant one.
Maybe one naive question from my side. Tim Berners-Lee and Robert Caillot, what their relative contributions and how did they work together or didn't work together?
They work together very well. The first proposal is just written by Tim Berners-Lee. The second one, as you can see, and the third one, if I'm not wrong, is written by both of them. And also addressed to the people from Tim Berners-Lee and Robert Caillot, you can see there. No, the second one just by Tim Berners-Lee. Anyway, Robert Caillot started to sign the other proposals. I'm showing just the first three, but then you can find several ones, including a missing one, according to Robert Caillot. He claimed that he had a proposal in 1988 written on a yellow page, but we haven't found it. So you never, and he lost it as well. So you see, if you don't have a source as an historian, you cannot say something, right? Robert Caillot recognizes that Tim Berners-Lee was a technical guy that created the technical ideas. Not very easy to understand, because if you have a look at this, at this picture, it's more for mathematicians, right, than to sell something to other people. By the way, it's very famous, the first comment that was done by Ben Siegel, so the chief of Tim Berners-Lee at that time, which is the comment, vague but exciting. So it's something that could be exciting, but it's too vague. I didn't get it, basically. It was the comment at that time. And there is a version with written on pencil, I think, this comment by Ben Siegel. So they work a lot together, and Robert became more the marketer, so the one promoting this idea over time and continuously.
Okay.
We have to.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
If there is no more questions, so we have a bit of time now for the rest of the presentation. So at 2:30 in the auditorium, there is in German a conference about the first transistor computer by Peter Wild. And then at 3:30, also in the main auditorium, the ground floor, first a video of Daniel Borel, Logitech founder, of 25 minutes, followed by Marc Bidiville talking about the mice development. So this will be the rest for today. So 2:30, one level down at the big auditorium. See you there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you.
Hope you like it. It was understandable. Thank you.
It was.
Yeah, thank you so much.